I'm Mike Petracca, and welcome to round 3 of WCMA's Inside the Rings profile of Hanshi Don Culp. In round 3, we're going to talk to Don about his very first martial arts tournament and how that led him to explore kickboxing and boxing. And we're also going to hear his opinion on what makes an effective martial arts instructor. That's next as we enter Inside the Ring for round 3 with Hanshi Don Culp.
It's time for Inside the Ring with host Mike Petracca.
Walk peacefully, yet ready to defend.
Mm-hmm.
That's up on the wall in your dojo.
Right.
Tell me about that.
Oh, man. Well, everything I tell you is true. That came to me in a dream.
In a dream?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Right when we were talking about opening up my dojo, so 1981 I opened. Right before that, probably around 1980, I was thinking of aspects of the dojo, and I must have gone to sleep thinking about, different parts of running the facility, and that came to me in a dream.
I
swear to God, I woke up the next morning and I wrote it on a piece of paper, and that's on our patch. It hangs in our dojo, and I didn't quite even really fully understand it at first. It's like, wow, this sounds cool,
It sounded right.
But it sounded right. And then as I matured, it's like, it's really right, Walk peacefully, yet ready to defend.
And how does that translate, and how do you teach your students that in real life?
Well, it kind of corresponds with what I feel is the true message of martial arts, which is to overcome, your insecurities and fears, develop a sense of ability to fight, because let's face it, we live in a society that you can be physically challenged and you better know how to fight.
Yes.
But the beauty of learning how to defend yourself transcends into your beauty of love and compassion. What I mean by that is if a student is bullied or picked on all the time, they're going to withdraw. And they're not going to really be able to develop these traits. They're not going to be able to show a lot of love or compassion because they're in fear all the time. That's overpowering them. So the ability to learn to defend yourself can make you feel more confident, obviously. And so consequently, you can be yourself. If you want to spread love around or be kind to people or help people that are in need, you can do it without any fear. If someone makes fun of you or teases you because you're taking a different route, it doesn't matter. If they get too aggressive, then you can take care of yourself. But it's not always about fighting. Sometimes it's looking a person in the eye and saying, I'm not afraid of you.
Sometimes that's all it takes.
That's all it takes. Talking from the ki, or the hara we call it, which is the spiritual center. Not speaking like high, but, getting down. Like when a dog's growling lightly, oh, they're playing, but when they go, whoa, you pull away, that's because it's from down deep. And so that's the depth of where you can develop yourself. But again, it's not just about fighting, it's about developing a confidence that you can protect yourself. So consequently, you don't have to go around bullying people or challenging people or even accepting challenges. If someone says, let's go outside and fight, you're like, I don't need to, man.
What's the purpose, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's no good that comes out of that,
And you talk a little bit about, you mentioned ego, several times during our conversation.
Right.
How does one start to control the ego or work with the ego?
Another great question. You're doing great, by the way.
Thank you very much, Shizen. I appreciate it.
Well, I had the same conversation with Sensei Von Krenner about 10 years ago. I was sitting on his porch looking over the Rocky Mountains in Kalispell, Montana, and I said, Sensei, I'm going to get rid of my ego. And he started laughing. I said, why are you laughing at me? He said, well, then you might as well start by cutting off your legs and your arms. And I said, what do you mean? He says, your ego is a part of you. And if I may share with you a story that he told me, which is an awesome story. He said, your ego is like a 1,200-pound oxen. He said, you could throw a rope around its neck and pull it, but it's not going to go. It goes wherever it wants to go because it's 1,200 pounds. He said, but if you caress it and feed it and brush it, you could throw a 500-pound plow around that ox and it'll pull it through a field for you. It'll give you a full day's of work. So the point is that your ego is very, very powerful. And if not taken care of, it'll control you. Like the 1,200-pound oxen. If it wants to go that way, you're not stopping it.
Right.
But if you learn how to work with it, if you learn to understand it and realize that it's part of your makeup, and it can be a good thing. It can create passion and drive and desire and a willingness to succeed. Then it becomes a positive part of your makeup, you see?
So you can work with it.
Absolutely.
It's workable.
Yeah, because otherwise, like Sensei said, you might as well start cutting part of your body away because it's part of you. It flows through you. So if someone says you have a big ego, well, that's not really a compliment if they're using it in a negative way. But if someone's confident, they're usually not going to say you have a big ego because they don't recognize that as ego. They recognize as, wow, just a confidence or a nice swagger that person has, or they have a belief in themselves. In reality, your ego is partly what fuels that. If you control it.
If you control it. That's great.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that story and answer.
It taught me a lot, yes. It was, I wish I could take credit for it, but that's what Sensei taught me. But I'm sure one of his teachers taught him.
Passed it
and
down.
That's the beauty of real martial arts. Not just how to punch or hurt someone, but this kind of aspect is very important to pass on.
So that leads me to my next question. It segues really beautifully. You talk a lot about your influences, both in Rhode Island and southern New England and far in Montana, Colorado, other places, and with Bruce Lee. What makes an effective teacher, and what characteristics have you taken that you impart to your students?
Well, the obvious is to not forget how you learned. So when there was a time when I didn't know what a reverse punch was or a side kick or even how to execute it or the mechanics of it. So when someone's struggling with something, it's important that you remember how you learned. So be patient with them. It's a delicate balance, but what I find, the more I tap into my spiritual side, the more I get to understand myself and my emotions more, then I can transcend that into my teaching. What I mean by that is if I have a class of students and we're doing a specific technique, half the students might do it perfectly. The other half might not. It's not right for me to get upset with them or say, why can't you guys do this? Because look, they can do it. Because you realize through your own understanding of your own emotions and your own spirituality that they're trying their absolute best. So you have to learn how to adjust and kind of cater, but not make it too easy. So it's a very thin line.
Balance.
Right, because some students might be like, oh, I don't want to do push-ups today. And you're like, well, how come? Well, I just don't feel like it. Drop down and give me 25, Or someone might say, look, I hurt myself, or then you can realize it's sincere, so you're like, okay, we'll bypass that today. So it's a delicate balance, but you're trying to get them to understand what they can and cannot do, but more importantly, what they can do if they just apply themselves a little bit more. So there's a little bit of prodding, but you have to have that balance with that.
So then that sounds like a little bit like one of Bruce Lee's teachings too, to be formless and flow like water.
Right.
And be malleable.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's Bruce Lee, a huge influence, So I'm really hard on myself as a teacher, so I don't want to do that same thing to my students. So that's another thing. We trained hard, man. I remember my first karate tournament. I had a cup and a mouthpiece.
Yeah. Take me there for a second. Because again, to set the stage for some of the viewers who were not in your studio, but you have some amazing pictures. One I love is you kind of just brooding in the back, and I think it's either waiting to
the boxing,
in the boxing one, and then the other one is you keeping somebody at distance that looked like kind of a bull, and that was also in the boxing.
Well, that was boxing, but my first karate tournament, I was 16. And an interesting story, it was a Nick Serial tournament, I think at the Knights of Columbus or something, and I was nervous as anything, but I trained really hard for it. I won every match 5-0, except the last match I fought my old buddy Mike Jones, who was a URI student. I was 16. He was probably 19 at the time.
Yeah.
We had a great match. I finally won 5-4 on a reverse turning kick. He was driving me out of the ring, and I spun and got him. I was still in the air, so they called it a point.
Oh, very nice.
But what was interesting about it, I remember Professor Serio said, is that the best you can do? Like after kind of joking, he said, you have such a bright career, and it was amazing. But I thought too much about that. In other words, when I fought in that first tournament, I wasn't thinking. I was just responding. So after that, I started to go to tournaments thinking, well, the same thing's going to happen, But it didn't happen because I was interfering by thinking too much. So it took me a few years to get over that and make the connection to that. So that was a little interesting story about my first tournament. Point karate started to get a little bit too like a game of tag to me. Not that I have great respect for it. There's some incredibly talented point fighters.
A lot of great point fighters.
But I would be there, and then I'd throw a nice punch and get touched, and they'd point. And I'm like, what the heck? I threw a nice strong punch. And that actually, if you want to discuss this later, gave me a lot of my philosophy on angle shifting. But I got out of point karate and started doing more kickboxing and then ultimately boxing. So that picture you're talking about was at my first boxing match. It was a little bit of a tricky thing. Somebody stuck their head in our dressing room and said, "Culp, you're next." So my coach was there, and he said, "Okay, let's warm up." So I warmed up.
Yeah,
it was
you get loose. You're
loose.
Expecting to go up
gloves
soon.
are on, everything, right? So I'm nervous, but I'm hitting the pads, and I'm ready to go.
Work up a good lather.
So the next bout ends, and we go walking out, and the promoter comes over. He goes, "What are you doing?" My coach says, "We're ready for our fight." He goes, "There's an intermission. You got another half hour before your fight." And so we went back in, and we realized that the other side, they tricked us.
I see.
And it's the strategy of war.
Gamesmanship,
Yeah,
right?
man, I'm cool with it. So that picture you saw was taken by a Boston Journal photographer who was there and stepped down on a table. And I'm there. My coach put towels all over me to keep me warm. And so I was kind of upset about that.
Let me tell you, man, that is a great shot. Like, for me, that's a really iconic shot because it captures your face, and it's totally different than your face now or how I know you as really happy and upbeat.
I was mad. And my coach was there. If you saw the picture, he's like, "Come on, calm down. Don't waste energy. It's going to be all right." So that was what that shot was all about.
That's really cool. So when it comes to being a good instructor, as Don puts it, you need to adjust for each student's capabilities accordingly. There is no one-size-fits-all approach. In round 4 with Hanshi Don Culp, we're going to explore his thoughts on MMA and how he feels traditional martial arts would be a great benefit for those who are competing in the sport. If you would like to learn more about Hanshi Don Culp, or if you're interested in training at his dojo, his doors are always open at 220 Old Baptist Road in North Kingston, Rhode Island. Or you can visit him on the web at donculp.net or call 401-885-9774.